You ever watch the happiest day of your life get hooked to a tow truck while your HOA president sipped champagne and smiled like she'd just won the lottery? The metallic clank of heavy chains snapping tight against my work truck echoed across the cul-de-sac before I even finished tying my tie. I froze halfway down my front porch steps, one hand still adjusting the collar of my tuxedo while diesel fumes rolled through the cool spring air. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The white tow truck sat crooked across my driveway with amber lights flashing against the neighborhood's perfectly trimmed hedges, and my old Ford F-250 was already halfway lifted off the ground like some kind of public execution. Wedding guests were arriving. My mother stood near the flower arch holding a tray of pastries she'd baked at 5 in the morning. Claire's bridesmaids had just stepped out of an SUV carrying white roses. And right there in the middle of it all stood Brenda Holloway in a cream-colored pantsuit, holding a champagne flute like she was hosting a garden party instead of destroying somebody's wedding day. Finally, she said loud enough for half the street to hear, "Someone handled this eyesore." A couple guests shifted awkwardly. I heard somebody whisper, "Is that his truck?" like they couldn't believe the giant blue-collar machine sitting in the driveway belonged to the guy wearing a tuxedo. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with hot transmission fluid while the tow operator tightened another chain under the axle. My stomach dropped so hard it physically hurt. That truck wasn't just transportation. My dad bought that Ford brand new in 1998 when I was 10 years old. Same truck I learned to drive and sitting on his lap with his calloused hand wrapped around mine on old county roads outside Cedar Hill. Same truck we used rebuilding fences after storms. Same truck I spent 3 years restoring after cancer took him away before he ever got to see me make something of myself. Every scratch on that faded blue paint carried a memory. Every dent had a story. And today, of all days, that truck was supposed to haul the cedar wedding arch I built for Claire with my own 2 hands. The toolboxes in the back still held extension cords, drills, and half the decorations for the reception barn 15 miles outside town. "Ma'am," the tow driver muttered nervously toward Brenda. "You sure this is legal guy lives here?" Brenda smiled without looking at him. Section 8. 4 of the HOA bylaws prohibits commercial vehicles during community events, especially weddings. Weddings. She said it like my marriage was violating neighborhood aesthetics. The crowd behind me fell dead quiet except for the distant hiss of lawn sprinklers ticking across somebody's perfect green yard. Claire stepped onto the porch beside me in her white robe, makeup half finished, her eyes locking onto the truck as the hydraulic lift groaned louder. I felt her hand wrap around my arm. Cold fingers, trembling slightly. "Ethan," she whispered. Brenda finally turned toward us with that polished realtor smile that never reached her eyes. "Honestly, sweetheart," she said to Claire, "today's too beautiful for ugly contractor vehicles cluttering the view." And right then, standing there in a tuxedo while my father's truck disappeared behind flashing amber lights, I realized something important about people like Brenda Holloway. They only feel powerful when they think nobody in front of them has the authority to push back. I stood there listening to the tow truck disappear down Willow Creek Drive while the chrome bumper of my father's Ford rattled against the steel lift chains. That sound stayed in my chest like a loose bolt vibrating inside an engine. Claire squeezed my hand harder, trying to keep me grounded while wedding guests awkwardly avoided eye contact and pretended to admire the flower arrangements. The smell of gasoline and fresh mulch drifted through the neighborhood, mixing with somebody's expensive perfume and the sweet frosting from our wedding cake sitting untouched inside the reception van. Brenda Holloway loved moments like that. Public moments. The kind where she could humiliate somebody while hiding behind HOA bylaws and fake concern about property values. What she saw when she looked at me was a contractor with rough hands and an old work truck parked in a driveway she thought should only hold luxury SUVs and spotless golf carts. She saw a guy who spent his mornings wearing steel-toe boots instead of loafers. Somebody who carried tape measures and permit folders instead of tennis bags. And honestly, for the first few months after Claire and I moved into Willowbrook Estates, I let her believe exactly that. The funny thing is, she was not completely wrong. Construction built my life. My father ran Walker Home Services for 30 years before lung cancer put him in the ground at 58. Roofing jobs in July heat. Concrete pours before sunrise. Crawl spaces packed with insulation thick enough to choke you. I grew up breathing sawdust and diesel fumes while other kids spent summers at baseball camps. Dad used to tell me, a good builder notices the problems nobody else sees. Turns out that advice works for more than houses. After he passed, I kept the business alive long enough to pay off his medical debt, but somewhere along the line I got tired of fixing the same corners other contractors kept cutting. Cheap wiring hidden behind drywall. Drainage systems slapped together without permits. Entire subdivisions built on shortcuts and handshakes. So 3 years ago, I went back to school at night, earned my certifications, and started working with county compliance offices across Cedar Ridge County. 6 months before the wedding, the county offered me a full-time position as the new code inspector replacing a retiring supervisor named Harold Bennett. Harold had spent 22 years uncovering illegal builds and zoning violations all over the county, and before he officially retired, he told me something that stuck in my head. Most corruption smells like fresh paint and landscaping. At the time, I laughed. Then I moved into Willowbrook Estates. From day one, the neighborhood felt too polished, too controlled. Every mailbox lined up with military precision. Every lawn trimmed exactly the same height. Even the air smelled artificial, like fertilizer and chlorine pumped through hidden speakers. And right in the center of it all stood Brenda Holloway patrolling the streets in her white Lexus like some suburban sheriff with a real estate license. She introduced herself 10 minutes after our moving truck arrived. I still remember the click of her heels against the driveway and the way her sunglasses reflected my old Ford while she smiled. "We work very hard to maintain standards around here," she said. "Not welcome to the neighborhood. Not congratulations on the new house. Standards." Then her eyes drifted toward my truck parked beside the garage. I watched her smile tighten just slightly at the sight of ladder racks and toolboxes. "Hopefully," she added softly, "that vehicle is temporary." I should have realized right then that Brenda Holloway did not hate rule breakers. She hated reminders that working people still existed. Brenda Holloway treated Willowbrook Estates like a private country club that accidentally allowed regular people through the gate. The woman had a talent for making everyday life feel like a probation hearing. Every Tuesday morning around 7, her white Lexus crept through the subdivision at exactly 12 miles per hour while she scanned driveways with oversized sunglasses and a stainless steel travel mug clutched in one hand. Most people waved at her because they were afraid not to. You could feel it the second she rolled past. Garage doors quietly closing. Music turning down. Neighbors suddenly remembering they needed to trim hedges or hide trash cans. The entire neighborhood operated on Brenda time. One afternoon about 2 months after we moved in, I came home from a county training seminar and found a bright orange violation notice taped dead center on my garage door. The paper snapped sharply in the warm wind while Claire stood nearby holding grocery bags with that exhausted look people get when they are tired of unnecessary drama. "Vehicle visibility violation," I read out loud. "Commercial equipment visible from street after 6 o'clock." I looked over at my truck sitting completely inside my driveway. The ladder rack had one extension ladder strapped down because I had spent the previous evening helping an elderly couple fix storm damage on their roof. That was it. One ladder. According to Brenda, that single aluminum ladder threatened the integrity of the community. Claire folded her arms and sighed. "She waited outside for 20 minutes until you got home." That was Brenda's favorite move. Public intimidation disguised as policy enforcement. She never emailed first. Never knocked politely. She liked being seen. A week later, she cited us again because the gravel dust from my truck tires supposedly dirted the curb line after a rainstorm. Another time, she complained the sound of my impact wrench disturbed the peaceful atmosphere of the neighborhood at 4:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday. For 30, kids were screaming at the community pool 20 yards away, but apparently my socket wrench was the real threat to civilization. The woman weaponized paperwork like a hobby. And the craziest part, most residents just accepted it because they thought fighting back would make things worse. One night, Claire and I attended an HOA meeting inside the clubhouse near the entrance fountain. The room smelled like lemon disinfectant and burnt coffee while folding chairs scraped across tile floors under fluorescent lights. Brenda stood at the front beside a projector screen wearing pearls and a pale blue blazer like she was running for governor instead of managing mailbox colors. Every sentence out of her mouth sounded rehearsed. Protecting community standards. Preserving property values. Maintaining neighborhood excellence. Then she spotted me sitting in the back row wearing work boots because I had come straight from inspecting a storm drain project across town. Her smile shifted immediately. "Certain residents," she announced while staring directly at me, "need to remember this neighborhood was designed to project refinement and professionalism." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the soda machine near the hallway. Claire's jaw tightened beside me. Brenda continued smiling while casually flipping through violation reports on her clipboard. Construction vehicles and visible labor equipment create the impression of unfinished development. There it was. Labor equipment. Not tools. Not work vehicles. Like honest work itself offended her personally. An older man named Carl Jensen finally spoke up from the second row. "Pretty sure the guy fixing roofs and electrical systems is more useful than another decorative fountain." A few people chuckled nervously, but Brenda did not laugh. Her eyes narrowed for maybe half a second before the fake smile returned. "Community image requires consistency," she said coldly. That was the moment I realized something important about Brenda Holloway. She did not care about rules. Rules were just camouflage. What she really cared about was control. And in her perfect little neighborhood, control meant deciding exactly which kind of people deserved to belong. By the time the ceremony finally started, the whole neighborhood already knew what Brenda had done. News traveled fast in Willowbrook Estates. Faster than lawn sprinklers. Faster than gossip at the mailbox cluster near the clubhouse. I could feel people watching me during the vows. Not because of the tuxedo or the wedding arch or the string lights hanging across the reception barn, but because half the guests had seen my father's truck hauled away like abandoned junk 30 minutes earlier. The air smelled like cedar wood and barbecue smoke drifting from the catering pits behind the barn, but underneath it all, I could still catch faint traces of diesel exhaust every time the wind shifted. Claire kept smiling through the ceremony, though I noticed her eyes drifting toward the empty gravel space beside the house where the truck should have been. She knew what that vehicle meant to me. She also knew Brenda had timed everything perfectly. Not the day before. Not after the wedding. During it. Public humiliation was the point. After the reception started, my cousin Derek drove me to the impound yard across county lines to retrieve the truck before the storage fees stacked higher. The sun was dropping low by then, turning the highway orange while country music crackled softly through his old Silverado speakers. I sat there in my tuxedo staring out the passenger window with dried flower petals still stuck to my jacket sleeve. "You okay?" Derek finally asked. I laughed once under my breath. "Nope." The impound yard sat behind a chain-link fence beside an abandoned warehouse near Interstate 14. Floodlights buzzed overhead, while rows of wrecked cars reflected the last bit of evening sunlight like broken mirrors. The smell hit immediately. Burnt rubber. Oil. Hot asphalt. A heavy mechanical smell that always reminds me of storm cleanup sites after tornado season. The clerk behind the front desk barely looked up when I walked in wearing formal shoes covered in dust. She slid paperwork across the counter while chewing gum loud enough to echo through the office. "Private HOA authorization tow," she said casually. $385. I scanned the paperwork while reaching for my wallet, mostly out of habit. Then something caught my eye. The county seal printed on the authorization form looked wrong. Tiny detail. Most people would never notice it. But I spent the last 6 months studying permit documents and compliance records every single day. Cedar Ridge County updated its official seal format 4 months earlier after switching database systems. The old version had thinner lettering around the outer ring. This tow form used the outdated seal. My stomach tightened slightly. I kept reading. The authorization listed the violation as emergency code enforcement under County Ordinance 11C. Problem was, Ordinance 11C did not cover parking enforcement. It covered flood drainage easements. I read it twice just to make sure. The fluorescent lights above me hummed softly while the clerk kept filing her nails without paying attention. Then I noticed another detail. Brenda had signed the tow request under County Community Compliance Representative. I stared at the paper for several seconds. She was not county anything. She was HOA president. There is a difference. A massive difference. Suddenly the whole thing smelled wrong. Not just petty. Illegal. Outside, I found my truck parked crooked near the back fence with rice from the wedding still stuck to the rear bumper. My father's old toolbox sat open in the bed where the tow operators had shifted things around carelessly. I climbed inside the cab and rested both hands on the steering wheel. The familiar scent of sawdust, motor oil, and worn leather filled the truck immediately. Home. Safe. Solid. But sitting there in the silence of that impound yard, looking at forged county language on the passenger seat paperwork, I realized Brenda Holloway might have just crossed a line she did not fully understand. Most people calm down after a wedding. Honeymoon photos. Thank you cards. Quiet evenings. Me, I spent the first 48 hours of married life sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by county code books, permit databases, and the towing paperwork Brenda Holloway thought I would never read carefully. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Claire slept upstairs exhausted from the wedding chaos, and the glow from my laptop painted the entire dining room pale blue. My father used to say bad contractors leave fingerprints everywhere. Turns out dishonest people do the same thing with paperwork. The deeper I dug into the tow authorization, the stranger it became. Brenda had cited county enforcement language she had zero legal authority to use. Worse, the towing company actually processed it without verification. That alone could trigger an investigation. But something else kept bothering me. The permit reference number listed on the document looked familiar. Around midnight, I finally found it buried inside the county planning archive. The number belonged to a drainage easement inspection completed almost 2 years earlier at Willowbrook Estates clubhouse expansion project. Same subdivision, same HOA, same signatures. My pulse slowed the way it always does when pieces start lining up. I clicked deeper into the files. The clubhouse renovation permit had passed final inspection unusually fast for a project that size. Too fast. Commercial additions normally require multiple inspections for electrical, fire suppression, accessibility compliance, and runoff management. Willowbrook somehow cleared everything in less than 10 business days. Impossible unless corners were cut or paperwork got pushed through quietly. The next morning, Claire walked downstairs wearing one of my old flannel shirts and found me still sitting there surrounded by open folders and legal pads. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the kitchen while thunder rolled low outside. She studied my face for a second. You are investigating them already, aren't you? I leaned back in the chair and rubbed my eyes. I am trying very hard not to. She smiled slightly because she knew exactly what that meant. Claire understood something most people did not. I do not enjoy conflict. I enjoy patterns. And once I notice one, my brain refuses to let it go. 3 days later, I drove through Willowbrook Estates just before sunset after finishing inspections on a storm-damaged shopping center outside Millfield. Warm orange light reflected off perfectly clean sidewalks while sprinklers hissed across identical front lawns. Brenda's kingdom looked peaceful from the outside, but now I saw things differently. The decorative stone entrance wall near the gate immediately caught my attention, hairline cracking along the mortar joints. Uneven drainage stains near the base. No visible expansion gaps. Cheap subcontractor work hidden behind expensive landscaping. Then I noticed the clubhouse retaining wall behind the pool area. Wrong slope angle. Water pooling near the lower concrete edge. That alone could become a structural liability after heavy rain. I slowed the truck beside the curb pretending to check my phone while mentally cataloging everything. Improper handrail spacing near the pool stairs. Exterior lighting mounted too low over the walkway. Drain grates near the tennis courts looked non-compliant for runoff volume requirements. One problem after another. Tiny things most residents would never see. But once you work county inspections long enough, bad construction practically glows in front of you. Then I spotted Brenda across the street talking to 2 homeowners beside the mailbox cluster. She laughed loudly while gesturing with manicured hands, completely relaxed, completely certain she still controlled the narrative. The evening wind carried the faint smell of chlorine and fresh paint through the subdivision while she smiled at neighbors like some polished suburban celebrity. She had no idea I already recognized 3 separate code violations within 50 yards of where she stood. And the scariest part for her, I still had not officially started my first day as county code inspector yet. My official start date landed the Monday after our honeymoon weekend, and Cedar Ridge County Administration building smelled exactly the way every government building in America smells. Burnt coffee, old paper, industrial carpet cleaner. The elevator rattled softly while employees shuffled through hallways carrying permit folders and stainless steel tumblers like they had been doing the same routine for 20 years straight. I stood in front of the mirror inside the restroom, adjusting a Navy County-issued jacket with the embroidered inspection seal stitched over the chest pocket. Funny thing about authority. Most of the time it looks painfully ordinary. No dramatic music. No giant speeches. Just a clipboard, a badge, and the legal power to stop people from pretending rules only apply to everyone else. Harold Bennett met me outside the inspection office carrying a cardboard box filled with retirement plaques and framed photos. "Ready for the circus?" he asked with a grin. I laughed quietly. "Depends who is performing." He handed me a county badge still cold from the engraving machine downstairs. The metal felt heavier than I expected. "One piece of advice," Harold said while sliding his truck keys into his pocket. "People do not fear inspectors because of fines. They fear documentation. Paper trails bury people." That line stayed with me all morning. Around 10:30, the receptionist near the front lobby suddenly sat up straighter at her desk after spotting someone walk through the glass entrance doors. I looked up from my paperwork and nearly smiled. Brenda Holloway. She wore another expensive cream-colored outfit with oversized sunglasses resting on top of perfectly styled blonde hair. The sharp click of her heels echoed across the lobby while she carried a thick complaint folder tucked under one arm like she owned the building. Two residents from Willowbrook followed nervously behind her. I could practically smell expensive perfume drifting across the room before she even reached the reception counter. "Good morning," Brenda announced brightly. "I am here to discuss repeated county harassment regarding our community landscaping permits." The receptionist nodded politely and started checking the schedule. Brenda kept talking loudly enough for the entire lobby to hear. "Frankly, some people in this county seem confused about the difference between luxury development and code violations." Then she laughed softly at her own joke. I stayed seated at my desk near the hallway entrance, flipping calmly through a stack of inspection forms while listening. She had not noticed me yet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while rain tapped lightly against the front windows outside. One of the residents shifted awkwardly beside her, holding a Willowbrook HOA binder against his chest. "Mrs. Holloway," the receptionist finally said carefully, "you are actually scheduled with our new county code inspector." Brenda smiled immediately. "Perfect. Maybe someone competent can finally clear this nonsense up." I stood up slowly from behind the desk. The chair wheels rolled softly backward across the tile floor. Brenda turned casually toward the sound at first, still smiling. Then her expression froze completely. It happened instantly. Her eyes dropped to the county badge clipped to my belt. Then the Navy jacket. Then the official folder in my hand-stamped Cedar Ridge County Compliance Division. The entire lobby went dead quiet except for the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. I watched the exact moment recognition hit her like cold water. The wedding, the tow truck, the forged county paperwork. Every single piece connected behind her eyes all at once. "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway," I said calmly. "Ethan Walker, County Code Inspector." Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. For the first time since moving into Willowbrook Estates, Brenda Holloway looked genuinely uncertain. Not angry, not smug, uncertain. And standing there watching the color slowly drain from her face, I finally understood something important. Bullies only feel untouchable until they realize the quiet guy they mocked actually works for the people who write the citations. The inspection started 3 days later under a gray Texas sky heavy with incoming rain. County vehicles lined the entrance of Willowbrook Estates just after 8 in the morning, while wet pavement reflected flashing amber safety lights across the decorative stone sign Brenda loved so much. The neighborhood looked different when official clipboards showed up. Curtains shifted behind windows. Garage doors cracked open an inch. People suddenly remembered appointments and dog walks. Fear moves quietly in HOA neighborhoods. I stepped out of the county truck wearing steel-toe boots and a navy windbreaker with Cedar Ridge County stitched across the back in white lettering. The cold morning air smelled like damp concrete and fresh mulch while inspectors unloaded equipment cases near the clubhouse parking lot. Brenda appeared almost immediately, power walking across the sidewalk with a forced smile stretched tightly across her face. "This seems excessive," she said before I even finished greeting the electrical inspector. Her voice still carried that polished realtor tone, but now there was tension underneath it, like strained piano wire. "Routine compliance review," I answered calmly while checking the permit file in my hands. Nothing to worry about if everything was built correctly. That sentence hit harder than yelling ever could. Behind her sunglasses, I saw the first flicker of panic. We started at the clubhouse. The moment the electrical inspector opened the exterior utility panel, he let out a low whistle. Water staining around improperly sealed conduit lines. Non-compliant breaker spacing. 2 circuits overloaded past legal threshold. Brenda immediately crossed her arms. That panel passed inspection years ago. Apparently not correctly. The inspector replied without even looking up. The smell of damp wiring insulation drifted faintly from the panel while he photographed every violation one by one. Then came the retaining wall behind the pool area. I crouched near the concrete edge while runoff water trickled slowly through visible cracks along the base. Cheap fill material. Poor drainage support. The county structural engineer shook his head almost instantly. This wall shifts another 2 inches during heavy rain. The entire lower deck could settle. One homeowner standing nearby muttered, "You have got to be kidding me." Brenda's smile disappeared completely after that. The next 2 hours turned into a legal avalanche. Missing ADA handrail compliance near the clubhouse entrance. Emergency exit lighting installed below code height. Improper drainage grading near the tennis courts causing runoff toward neighboring lots. Decorative entrance columns built without updated structural permits. Every violation carried documentation. Photos. Measurements. County records. No arguments. No intimidation tactics. Just paperwork. Cold, patient paperwork. And then we reached the towing records. That was the real bomb. The county transportation liaison flipped through the authorization forms while rain started tapping softly against the clubhouse windows. "These signatures are invalid," he said flatly. County enforcement authority was falsified here. Silence hit the room immediately. One of the HOA board members slowly lowered his coffee cup onto the table like his hand suddenly stopped working. Brenda stepped forward fast. "There must be some misunderstanding." I placed the forged towing form gently onto the conference table beside the county code book. "You represented yourself as a county compliance authority to remove private property," I said evenly. "That is not a misunderstanding." The room felt colder after that. Even the air conditioner hum sounded sharper somehow. Homeowners started whispering among themselves while the county liaison continued reviewing documents. Then another issue surfaced. The towing company handling Willowbrook HOA removals had received exclusive contracts without proper county filing disclosures. Kickback territory. Conflict of interest territory. Brenda's face lost color so quickly it almost startled me. By late afternoon, official violation notices covered nearly the entire conference table. Fine estimates climbed past $400,000 between structural corrections, permit failures, drainage remediation, and fraudulent enforcement filings. Outside, rain hammered the subdivision roads hard enough to expose standing water pooling exactly where the runoff reports predicted it would. I stood near the clubhouse entrance watching muddy water creep across the sidewalk, while homeowners stared at the flooding in disbelief. And all I could think about was how Brenda Holloway spent years obsessing over spotless driveways, while the entire foundation underneath her perfect neighborhood quietly rotted beneath the surface. Willowbrook Estates completely unraveled in less than a week. That was the part nobody expected. People assume corruption collapses with explosions and screaming matches, but real collapse sounds quieter than that. It sounds like nervous whispers at mailboxes. It sounds like garage doors shutting when reporters drive through the neighborhood. It sounds like homeowners refreshing property value estimates on their phones while rainwater pools around illegally graded sidewalks. By Friday morning, county violation notices were posted across the clubhouse entrance in bright orange weatherproof sleeves. The papers flapped sharply in the wind beside the same decorative fountain Brenda once bragged increased community prestige. Now the fountain had caution tape around exposed electrical conduit near the base. Funny how fast luxury turns into liability once inspectors start measuring things. I drove through the subdivision around noon for a drainage follow-up inspection and barely recognized the atmosphere. The place smelled different. Wet dirt, anxiety, fresh concrete dust from emergency contractor crews already tearing apart sections of the retaining wall near the pool. Residents stood in clusters near driveways speaking in low voices, while county trucks rolled slowly through the neighborhood taking photographs. Nobody waved at Brenda anymore. In fact, most people actively avoided her. The woman who spent years acting like mayor of the subdivision now moved through Willowbrook like someone trying not to be seen. Then came the local news station. A silver media van parked outside the entrance just before dinner, while a reporter in a red rain jacket filmed segments beside the cracked stone sign. Homeowners gathered across the street pretending not to watch while camera lights reflected off puddles lining the curb. One older resident named Mrs. Delgado spotted me stepping out of the county truck and quietly walked over holding an umbrella against the drizzle. "You know," she said softly, "my husband warned the board about those drainage problems 2 years ago." Her voice shook slightly from frustration. Brenda told everyone he was overreacting. That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because that was the real damage people like Brenda caused. Not just fake violations or towing scams. It was the culture of intimidation. The constant pressure making decent people stay quiet because challenging authority felt exhausting. Inside the clubhouse, the emergency HOA meeting looked more like a financial funeral than a neighborhood gathering. Folding chairs scraped across tile, while frustrated homeowners argued over projected repair costs displayed on a giant screen near the front wall. The smell of burnt coffee and wet jackets filled the room. Somebody near the back kept muttering numbers under his breath after hearing estimated special assessments could exceed $12,000 per household. Brenda sat stiffly beside the remaining board members, clutching a stack of papers with both hands. Her usual polished confidence had disappeared completely. No pearl necklace. No fake smile. Just pale skin and exhausted eyes darting nervously whenever someone mentioned county fraud investigations. Then one homeowner stood up near the middle row holding a copy of the towing authorization paperwork. "Did you seriously forge county enforcement forms?" he demanded. The room erupted immediately after that. Questions flew from every direction. Who approved the towing contracts? Why were permits missing? Why did nobody disclose drainage concerns during annual meetings? Brenda tried speaking twice, but the crowd kept cutting her off louder each time. For years, she controlled every conversation inside that room with polished speeches and HOA bylaws. Now nobody wanted to hear another word from her. Claire arrived quietly near the end of the meeting carrying takeout coffee for me because she knew I had skipped dinner again. She slipped her hand into mine while chaos echoed across the clubhouse behind us. Outside, rain finally stopped falling. The wet pavement reflected amber county lights across the entrance road while emergency contractors packed up equipment for the night. Claire leaned gently against my shoulder and looked toward the clubhouse windows glowing in the dark. "You know what is strange?" she whispered. "She spent years trying to make this place look perfect." I stared at the cracked retaining wall illuminated under floodlights, while workers measured water damage below it. "Yeah," I said quietly. And all she really did was hide the rot better. 3 months later, Willowbrook Estates looked like a completely different neighborhood. The massive decorative entrance wall Brenda once treated like a crown jewel had been partially demolished for structural repairs. Fresh concrete barriers lined sections of the road where drainage systems were being rebuilt from scratch. County contractors move through the subdivision almost daily now, their reflective safety vests flashing beneath the Texas sun, while the steady rumble of excavation equipment echoed across the once perfect streets. Funny thing about truth. Once it finally surfaces, you cannot paint over it again. The investigation spread far beyond simple code violations. County auditors uncovered years of undisclosed contractor relationships tied to the HOA board. The towing company lost its operating agreement with 3 subdivisions after regulators reviewed the forged authorization paperwork. One board member quietly resigned and moved out before the end of the month. Another started cooperating with county investigators after financial records revealed irregular community enforcement fees routed through private accounts connected to landscaping contracts. And Brenda Holloway, she disappeared faster than I thought possible for someone who once treated every sidewalk like her personal runway. The white Lexus stopped cruising the neighborhood. The mailbox patrols ended. Nobody saw her at the clubhouse anymore after the HOA board voted to remove her as president during a closed emergency session. Last I heard, she listed her house below market value, hoping for a quick sale before more details reached local news outlets. Turns out luxury neighborhoods lose their shine once words like fraud investigation start appearing online beside property listings. One Saturday morning near the end of summer, I stood in my garage restoring the final cedar panels from our wedding arch, while sunlight spilled through the open door onto the concrete floor. The familiar smell of sawdust and motor oil filled the air, while old country music crackled softly from a shelf radio beside my toolbox. My father's Ford sat parked exactly where it belonged, washed clean and gleaming under fresh wax for the first time in months. Claire walked into the garage carrying 2 iced coffees and stopped beside the truck with a smile. She ran her fingers lightly across the faded blue paint near the driver's side door. Still ugly according to HOA standards, she teased gently. I laughed quietly and leaned against the workbench. Probably worse now. But the truth is, something about the truck looked different to me after everything that happened. Stronger somehow. Not because of revenge. Not because Brenda lost control. Because for the first time since moving into Willowbrook Estates, I no longer felt like I needed permission to belong there. The neighborhood itself slowly changed too. Homeowners started attending county planning meetings. Residents questioned HOA spending reports instead of blindly approving them. People who barely spoke before now stood outside talking openly in driveways during the evenings while kids rode bikes past construction crews fixing years of hidden shortcuts. One afternoon, Mrs. Delgado waved me over while I checked runoff grading near the tennis courts. "You know," she said smiling softly, "people are not scared around here anymore." That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. The fear was gone. And once fear disappears, bullies lose the only real tool they ever had. Later that night, Claire hung our framed wedding photo inside the garage above the old workbench where my father used to sharpen blades and sort hardware jars. In the picture, we were both laughing seconds after the ceremony ended, completely unaware of the storm waiting outside our driveway. Looking at that photo now, I realized something almost funny. Brenda Holloway thought towing my truck would embarrass me. Thought she could reduce a lifetime of honest work into something ugly enough to hide from public view. But she made one mistake people like her always make. She judged value by appearance instead of substance. And in the end, the old contractor truck she hated so much carried the one person capable of exposing the cracks underneath her entire perfect little kingdom. Justice is funny like that. It does not scream. It does not chase attention. Most of the time, it just quietly waits for someone arrogant enough to hand over the evidence.